She only needed money to save her mother. That was all. But when she woke up in a locked penthouse suite, a diamond ring on her finger, and armed men standing at every door, she realized the paper she signed the night before wasn't a work contract. It was a marriage certificate. And her new husband, the man she had never met, never chosen, never wanted, was Roman Calder, the most feared name in Las Vegas, the man who owned judges, bent cops, and buried problems without leaving a trace. She thought she was signing an NDA. She signed her life away instead. Hit like, drop your city in the comments, and don't you dare look away. Because this story is just getting started. The double shift had gutted her. Mara Ellison walked out of the Velvet Luxe at 1:47 in the morning with her heels in one hand and her dignity somewhere on the floor of the lounge's back corridor, probably near the trash compactor where one of the bartenders had spilled a full tray of whiskey sours around midnight and nobody had cleaned it up properly. Her feet were raw. The balls of her toes had gone past pain into something numb and distant, like a signal from a body part that had simply given up filing complaints. The Strip was still alive behind her. It was always alive. That was the thing nobody told you about Las Vegas when you moved here at 22 with a dance bag and the specific stupid optimism of someone who had never once failed at anything that mattered. The city never turned off. It just changed registers, swapped the tourist crowd for the desperate crowd, the daytime noise for a different kind of noise that was somehow louder because it was quieter. The sound of people making choices they would regret before sunrise. Mara had stopped being a tourist in this city a long time ago. She was not quite desperate yet, but she could see it from where she was standing. She found her phone in her apron pocket and checked the balance notification she'd been avoiding all day. The number was exactly as bad as she'd expected. Worse, because seeing it written out made it real in a way that mental math never quite did. Her mother's hospital had called twice during the shift. She'd felt the vibration through her apron both times and let it go to voicemail because she couldn't afford to cry in front of customers, and she absolutely would have cried. Diane Ellison was 61 years old, had worked as a seamstress her entire adult life, and was currently 3 weeks into a hospital stay for a cardiac event that the doctors were calling manageable in the tone of voice that meant expensive. The voicemails would say the same thing they always said. They needed a decision on the next round of treatment. They needed a payment plan confirmed. They needed to know the family had a plan. Mara was the family. Mara was the plan. She was standing on the sidewalk outside the service exit, shoes dangling from her fingers, staring at the number on her phone, when the man in the gray suit appeared at her elbow. He was around 50, lean, with the particular blankness of someone professionally trained to look like furniture. He held a cream-colored envelope, and he held it the way expensive things get held, with a kind of casual certainty, like its value was not up for debate. Mara Ellison? She looked at him. Who's asking? I represent a private client who's interested in securing your services for a single evening event. He extended the envelope. The compensation package is outlined inside. If you're interested, there's a car waiting. She didn't take the envelope immediately. She'd been in Vegas long enough to know what men in suits offering envelopes to women outside service exits usually meant, and she was tired, not stupid. What kind of event? Hosting, greeting guests, managing room flow. You've done it before. I do it every night. I don't need a middleman for it. The rate is different. He nodded at the envelope. Open it. She opened it. The number inside made her stop breathing for approximately 3 seconds. It was written on a single card in clean black type. No frills, no explanation, just the figure, and below it, 2 words. One night. It was enough to cover 2 months of her mother's treatment. Not all of it, not close to all of it, but 2 months of breathing room, 2 months of not checking her phone in bathroom stalls between tables, 2 months of not doing the same mental math over and over, and always arriving at the same answer, which was that there wasn't enough. There's paperwork, the man said. Standard for private events at this level. Non-disclosure agreement, confidentiality terms. The client values privacy. Who's the client? Anonymous. That's the nature of the engagement. Any reasonable version of her would have walked away. She knew that. The version of her that had arrived in this city 4 years ago with dance calluses on her feet and a 5-year plan would have handed the envelope back and kept walking. But that version of her hadn't sat across from a hospital billing coordinator 6 times in 3 weeks. That version hadn't done the math. "Show me the paperwork," she said. The car was a black SUV idling at the corner. Inside, it smelled like leather and cold air, and something faintly chemical that she couldn't identify. The man in the gray suit sat across from her and produced a folder. The documents were multiple pages, dense with legal language, clauses running into each other in the particular way that legal language does when it's designed to be read but not understood. She was 26 years old. She had not finished college. She had no lawyer, no one to call at 2 in the morning who could parse contract language. She read what she could. The NDA was standard-looking: confidentiality clauses, non-disclosure of the client's identity, prohibition on discussing the event or its attendees. There were signature lines at the bottom of several pages. The man in the gray suit pointed to each one with a pen and waited. The car was moving. She hadn't noticed it start moving. She signed. She told herself later, and she would have a lot of time to tell herself things later, that she hadn't been coerced. Not exactly. There had been no gun, no threats, just the number on that card, and the voicemails she hadn't listened to yet, and the specific exhaustion of a person who has been carrying something heavy alone for too long and cannot afford, even for a moment, to put it down. She signed. What happened in the hours that followed existed in her memory as fragments, not a sequence. A hotel lobby she didn't recognize, marble floors and low gold lighting. An elevator. A corridor with no windows. A room. No, a suite. Enormous and dim. The strip's glow pushing through curtain gaps in thin orange lines. Someone handing her a glass of water. The water tasting slightly off, slightly sweet, and her thinking she was just tasting her own exhaustion, the phantom sugar of a body that had been running on adrenaline and bad coffee since 4 in the afternoon. And then, nothing. The nothing lasted until morning. She woke to the sound of low voices and the sensation of sheets that were too expensive to belong to any bed she had ever slept in. The ceiling above her was coffered plaster. The room was lit by indirect light, soft and directionless. For a single, suspended moment, she was simply aware of these details without understanding what they meant. Then she tried to sit up and her head swam badly enough that she had to put a hand down to stop herself from tipping. Her mouth was dry. Her eyes felt gritty. The voices stopped. A door opened. 2 men came in. Black suits, earpieces. They stood inside the doorway and did not say anything, and the specific way they positioned themselves, bodies slightly angled, hands loose at their sides, told her before her brain had fully caught up that these were not hotel security guards. These were something else. "Where am I?" Her voice came out rough. Neither of them answered. She looked down. She was still in her clothes from the night before, her work dress, wrinkled and slightly twisted, except that her left hand was wrong. Something on it was wrong. She raised it and stared at the ring that had not been on her finger when she'd signed those papers in the back of a moving SUV. It was not a subtle ring. It was a diamond solitaire in a platinum setting, substantial and clear and absolutely, undeniably real. "What?" she said. Not a question. More like the beginning of a word she hadn't found yet. "Mr. Calder will be with you shortly." One of the men spoke for the first time. Flat voice. No expression. "Mr. Calder," she repeated. "Who is—" "I need to leave. I need my phone. I need— Your personal items are on the bureau." She stood too fast and had to grip the bedpost. Her legs worked. Her balance came back. She found her phone on a carved wooden bureau near the window and checked it with hands that were steadier than she expected, because some part of her had already shifted into a mode she recognized from very bad moments. The mode where you stop feeling the fear and start operating through it. 11 missed calls, 3 from the hospital, 2 from her coworker Tess, 6 from a number she didn't recognize. No signal. She looked at the window. The curtains were drawn, but light pushed through the edges, and the strip of view she could see past the curtain's hem showed her a skyline she recognized. The bent crescent of a major hotel tower, the distant wash of neon, even in daylight. She was in Vegas. Still in Vegas, high up. 30 floors, maybe more. She tried the door to the corridor, locked from the outside. The room had 2 other doors, one to a bathroom, one to what turned out to be a small sitting room with chairs and a glass-topped coffee table, and a second window that also showed the skyline from the same impossible height. She went to this window and pressed her palm flat against it and looked down at the street below, at the tiny moving shapes of cars and people, and understood very clearly that she was not going anywhere through a window. She was still standing at the glass when she heard the outer door open. He came in the way powerful men sometimes move through space. Not slowly, not quickly, but with the particular efficiency of someone who has never once in his adult life had to wait for a room to accommodate him. The room simply accommodated him. He was tall, dark-haired, somewhere in his early 30s, with a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so completely locked down. Not cold exactly, locked, like something capable of expression that had chosen not to bother. He was carrying a coffee cup. He looked at her standing at the window with her palm against the glass, and something crossed his face. Not quite surprise, more like a recalibration. "You're awake," he said. "Obviously." She turned to face him fully. Her heart was going hard, but her voice was not going to show it. She had learned, working in venues full of men who confused a woman's composure for an invitation, that showing fear was a choice. "Who are you, and why am I locked in this room?" He set the coffee cup on the table. He looked at her for a moment in a way that was not threatening, but was absolutely assessing. The look of someone gathering information before committing to a sentence. "Roman Calder," he said. The name landed. She knew the name. Everyone in Vegas knew the name, the same way everyone knew the names of certain streets or certain storms, things that shaped the landscape whether you interacted with them or not. Roman Calder, the Calder Group, casino interests, security firms, real estate, and underneath all of it, in the specific way that Vegas underground economics worked, things that nobody discussed in daylight. "Okay," she said. She kept her voice flat. "Roman Calder, why am I here?" He didn't answer immediately. He pulled a document from the inside pocket of his jacket, folded, creased from being carried, and held it out to her. She crossed the room and took it. It was the paperwork she had signed, all of it. But now, reading it in daylight with a clear head and the specific sharpness of someone who has just woken up to a crisis, she read differently. She read the clauses she'd skimmed in the back of a moving car at 2 a.m, desperate and tired and willing to believe what she was told. She read the language that she had taken to mean confidentiality and privacy and non-disclosure. She read it to the end. The final clause, the one she had signed her name under, was not a confidentiality agreement. It was a contractual consent to civil union under Nevada's private ceremony provisions, witnessed by 2 parties, with a certificate of marriage filed that same evening with a notary of record. Her hand was steady on the paper. Barely. "This says we're married," she said. "Yes. I signed this thinking it was an NDA. "I know." She looked up at him. "You know. I didn't arrange this." The words came out flat and certain, the way someone states a fact they know will not be immediately believed. "I woke up this morning in the suite next door with the same document and the same ring, and a call from my attorney telling me the marriage had been filed and leaked to 3 press outlets before dawn." She stared at him. "Leaked? By whoever set this up." He pulled out a chair from the table and sat down in it, not as an invitation, but simply because standing and conducting this conversation seemed inefficient to him. "Someone drugged us both, staged a ceremony, paid a notary to file it. By the time I was conscious enough to stop it, it was already on page 6. "Page 6, she repeated. She was still holding the document. Her fingers had gone white at the knuckles. "Someone drugged us and married us and put it in the press." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her for a moment. "That's what I'm currently spending a significant amount of money trying to find out." She put the document on the table. She sat down across from him, not because she was comfortable, not because she trusted him, but because her legs had made a unilateral decision that standing was no longer the priority. She sat and she breathed and she looked at the ring on her hand and then at the man across the table who was watching her with the careful attention of someone trying to predict an outcome. "I need to get to my mother," she said. "Where is she?" "Desert Springs Medical. She's been admitted 3 weeks, cardiac." He reached into his jacket pocket again. This one produced a phone and held it out to her. "Use this, full signal." She took it. She called the hospital. She got through to her mother's floor, spoke to the duty nurse, confirmed Diane Ellison was stable, confirmed there were no urgent changes overnight. She ended the call and sat with the phone in her hand for a moment before she put it on the table between them. I want out of this, she said. So do I. Then annul it, divorce it. Whatever the legal mechanism is, use it. It's not that simple. He said it without apology, the way someone states a condition of the landscape. The filing went to press. My enemies, and I have specific, serious enemies, now know you exist. They believe you're my wife. Whoever set this up knew that pulling you out immediately would look like weakness, like I was rattled, like I could be manipulated, which is exactly the message they want to send. She absorbed this. So I'm bait. You're a variable in someone else's strategy. I'm trying to determine whose. And while you determine that, what am I? A prisoner? Something shifted in his face. Not softness, more like a recognition of the word's accuracy that he didn't like. You're under protection. The door being locked is not about containing you. It's about keeping you alive while the situation is assessed. There's a difference? He looked at her directly. Yes. She looked back at him. She was cataloging him the way she cataloged difficult customers, not to be afraid of them, but to understand them, to know where the pressure points were, where the performance ended and the person began. He was controlled, not performatively controlled, not the aggressive composure of a man trying to seem impressive, but genuinely, structurally controlled in the way of someone who had built a life inside a situation that did not allow for emotional improvisation. He was also, she noticed, exhausted. Not visibly. He would not let it be visible. But there was something in the set of his jaw and the slight tension around his eyes that she recognized from mirrors. The particular exhaustion of someone who had been managing something impossible for too long without putting it down. She didn't let that soften her. She filed it. What's the offer? She said. He blinked. The first crack in the composure, small and quick. What? You said you want the same thing I want, which is out. You said it's complicated, which means you're not just going to open the door and let me walk. So what's the offer? What do you need from me and what do I get? He studied her for a moment. You're practical. I've been practical my whole life. It's the only thing that's kept me afloat. What's the offer, Mr. Calder? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, public appearances. 2 weeks, maybe 3. My wife, on paper, and in rooms where it matters. Long enough for me to find who did this and remove them as a variable. After that, a divorce filing, fully funded legal team on your side, no contested provisions. And, he paused, the pause of someone calculating, the hospital bills, all of them, current and going forward until your mother is discharged and stabilized. She felt the offer hit her in the chest like something physical. She kept her face neutral. All of them. Every invoice. She breathed. Why would you do that? Because you didn't choose to be here. Because whoever used you to get to me is responsible for your exposure, and I don't operate by leaving civilian damage unpaid. I'm not a civilian. No, he said, and something in his tone changed. You're clearly not. She looked at the ring on her hand, at the window, at the documents on the table. She thought about her mother in a hospital bed 3 weeks into a stay that was bleeding money Mara didn't have and couldn't generate fast enough at 150 in tips on a good night. She thought about the contract she'd signed in the back of a car, exhausted and desperate, without reading it fully. She had been used. She had been maneuvered into a position by someone else's strategy, and she had cooperated because she was tired and broke and alone. That was the truth of it, and she could be angry about it. She was angry about it. Underneath the controlled breathing and the flat voice, there was a white heat that she was containing through will. But anger was not currency. 2 conditions, she said. He waited. First, I go see my mother today, in person, not a phone call. I go to the hospital and I sit with her and I make sure she's actually okay. Your men can stand in the parking lot if they need to. I don't care, but I go. Agreed. Second, you tell me the truth, not the managed version of it, not what you think I need to know. If I'm going to be in rooms with people who might want to use me against you, I need to know what I'm actually standing inside, the whole picture. He looked at her for a long moment. That's an unusual condition. I'm an unusual situation. Do we have a deal or not? He picked up the coffee cup, drank from it, set it back down. The entire gesture was measured, and she got the sense that it was not delay. It was him actually considering her in the specific way that people who are accustomed to making fast decisions consider something that doesn't fit their existing categories. "We have a deal," he said. The first hour in Roman Calder's orbit was a lesson in the logistics of power. Two additional men in black suits materialized in the corridor. A woman named Claire, mid-40s, impeccably dressed, with the brisk efficiency of someone whose job was to solve problems before they became problems, appeared with a change of clothes for Mara, a toiletry kit, and a schedule printed on heavy paper stock. The schedule had time blocks. Mara's name appeared in several of them. She changed in the bathroom, which was larger than her apartment's main room and had a window that looked east toward the mountains. She stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Her mascara had migrated south. There were shadows under her eyes from the bad sleep, and whatever had been in that water and the simple biological cost of operating in crisis mode for hours on insufficient reserves. She washed her face. She put on the clothes, plain dark pants, a silk blouse that fit almost exactly right, which made her wonder briefly and uncomfortably about how that was possible. She looked at her reflection. "Okay," she told it quietly. "Okay." The hospital visit happened at noon. 3 black SUVs. 4 men in suits who fanned out through the hospital lobby and parking structure with the practiced quiet of people who did this professionally. A private elevator to the cardiac floor. Mara walked the corridor to her mother's room alone, because she had made that specific boundary very clear, and Roman, to his credit, had not argued it. Diane Ellison was smaller in hospital light than she was in memory. She had always been a compact, efficient woman, self-sufficient in the specific way of people who could not afford not to be. She'd raised Mara alone after Mara's father left when Mara was 7, worked 2 jobs for years, kept the lights on, and the fridge stocked through sheer organizational willpower. Seeing her in the hospital bed with monitors attached and a pallor that didn't belong on her face did something to Mara's chest that she didn't have language for. "You look like you haven't slept," her mother said. "You're the one with the heart thing." "My heart is fine. It was a blip. It was a cardiac event." "Blip?" Her mother reached for her hand and took it, and then her eyes went to the ring, and she was quiet for a moment. "That's new." Mara sat in the chair beside the bed. She thought about what to say and decided that the truth, in some form, was less exhausting than the alternatives. "It's complicated." "Complicated like expensive complicated?" "Complicated like I need you to trust me and not ask too many questions right now." Her mother looked at her. Diane Ellison had eyes that saw through things. Through excuses, through evasions, through the specific kind of fine that meant not fine at all. She had always been able to read Mara the way other people read text. "Are you safe?" Mara thought about that. About the men in the parking structure and the locked penthouse, and the contract she hadn't read, and the man who had looked at her across a coffee table and said, "We have a deal with the specific gravity of someone for whom that phrase had actual weight." "I think so," she said. "I'm working on it." Her mother squeezed her hand and let it go. "The bills are being handled." "Mara, Mom." She said it quietly, firmly. "Let me handle it. That's my job." Her mother was quiet. Then, "Who is he?" "What?" "The ring. There's always a he. I raised you. I know what that face means." Mara looked at the window. Outside, the afternoon light was flat and bright over the city she had come to 4 years ago to dance and had stayed in for reasons that accumulated the way debt accumulates. Quietly, then suddenly. "His name is Roman. He's complicated too." "Complicated men are trouble." "I know. You like trouble." "I really don't." "You always did," her mother said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite amusement but lived in the same neighborhood. "Your father was trouble. That dance company you wanted to start was trouble. You just like things that are hard, baby. You always have." Mara sat with her mother for 2 hours. She held her hand and watched bad daytime television and didn't talk about any of the things that were actually happening, which was in some ways the most normal 2 hours she'd had in months. When she came back out to the corridor, Roman was there. He was not supposed to be there. He was supposed to be in the lobby or the parking structure or somewhere that was not the 4th floor cardiac corridor outside her mother's room. But he was there, standing with his back against the opposite wall, jacket off and folded over his arm, looking at the floor the way people look at floors when they are waiting and thinking and not trying to appear to be doing either. He looked up when she came out. "How is she?" he asked. It was the last thing she had expected him to say. "Stable," Mara said. She studied him for a moment. "You didn't have to come up." "No, but you did." He didn't answer. He pushed off the wall and put his jacket back on in one motion and became, in about 3 seconds, the version of himself that existed in controlled spaces. Composed, contained, all the machinery running behind closed panels. But she had seen the other version, the floor-staring version. She filed that too. They walked back to the elevator together, close enough that she was conscious of the space between them, the precise and careful inches of it. "Claire has prepared the penthouse for you," he said. "There's a separate suite, yours. Your things from your apartment will be moved this afternoon. If there's anything specific you need." "You moved my things." "We arranged to have them moved, yes." She stopped walking. He stopped too. "You moved my things," she said again, because the repetition was covering the specific texture of the feeling that came with it, which was the feeling of someone rearranging your life in your absence, as though you were a piece of furniture being repositioned for better aesthetic effect. "Without asking me." "The apartment was a security risk. Your address was already a—" "I don't care about the security logic. I care that you moved my things without asking." She held his gaze. "If this is a deal, it's a deal between two people. I am one of those people. You do not move my things without asking." Something moved through his face. Not apology exactly, closer to acknowledgement. "It won't happen again." "No," she said, "it won't." They stood in the corridor of a cardiac ward looking at each other, and she was aware that this was an absurd and specific kind of moment. A conversation about consent and boundaries happening between two people who were legally married and had never met before this morning. But absurdity had ceased to be disorienting. She was past disorienting. She was in pure operational mode now. She started walking again. He fell into step beside her. The afternoon was a series of briefings. She sat across from Roman and his attorney, a lean man named Garvey, who had the precise, guarded warmth of someone who had spent his career being useful to dangerous people, and listened to the legal landscape of her situation. The marriage, once filed and publicized, could be annulled or contested, but not quietly. Any move they made would generate press. Roman's opponents were already watching. Moving too fast would signal panic. Moving too slow would allow his enemies to construct their own narrative around the union. She listened. She asked 3 questions that Garvey answered with the slightly surprised precision of someone not expecting to be engaged at that level. She met Claire, who managed Roman's household and scheduling and operated with the specific blend of warmth and steel that comes from genuinely caring about the work. Claire showed her the second suite, her suite, which was separate from Roman's, connected only by a shared sitting area with a lockable door on each side. The gesture, Mara thought, was deliberate. It said, "This is yours. The borders are yours." She was standing at the window of her suite at 6 in the evening, watching the strip beginning to light up in the way it did as the day faded. Not gradually, not elegantly, but all at once, like a machine that had been waiting for permission, when she heard the sound behind her. She turned. Roman was standing in the doorway of the shared sitting area. He had not knocked. He caught himself. She could see him catch himself, and stopped. "Sorry," he said. The word came out slightly stiff, like a word he didn't use often enough to be fluid with. "It's fine." She turned back to the window. He came to stand beside her, not close, far enough that there was the window and the glow of the city and several feet of air between them. He looked at the strip without speaking for a moment. "Did you always want to be in Vegas?" he asked. The question was so left field that she almost laughed. "No, I came to dance. I stayed because I ran out of runway before I ran out of reasons to try." "What kind of dance?" "Contemporary, choreography mostly. I had plans." She paused. "They're shelved." "Plans aren't always gone," he said, "just delayed." She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the window, at the city, at the particular version of Las Vegas that existed from 40 stories up, cleaned of its ground-level desperation, reduced to light and geometry. There was something in his face at that angle, something that she hadn't been able to see in the full-frontal, deliberate composure of their earlier conversations. Something older than his age, and quieter. "Who do you think set this up?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. I have a theory. Tell me. He turned to look at her. I told you I'd give you the whole picture. You did. He looked at her for a moment more. That calculating, assessing look that she was beginning to understand was not about distrust, but about the habit of a man who had survived in a world that punished imprecision. Then he said, There's a succession element to my organization. My grandfather built it. My father ran it. I inherited it at 28 under specific terms. One of those terms is a provision in the organizational charter. Old, archaic, the kind of thing no one expected to actually matter. That requires a sitting leader to have a legal spouse before his 33rd birthday to retain full authority over the Calder holdings. Mara absorbed this. When's your 33rd birthday? 11 weeks. So someone inside your organization forced my hand, gave me a wife before I could do it on my own terms, or failed to do it and lose authority. He paused. But the leak to the press was the part that went further than internal politics. That's someone using the situation. Someone who wants to destabilize me publicly, not just legally. Two different someones, she said. He looked at her. Possibly the same person, or possibly someone who saw an internal move and decided to piggyback on it. She looked back at the window, at the city, at all its light. She had lived in this city for 4 years, and she had never once, she realized, considered what it looked like from up here, from the level where the decisions got made. 11 weeks, she said. Yes. And in 11 weeks, you'll either have a real legal wife or I'll lose operational control of the Calder Group to a board vote. He said it flatly, which is what someone wants. She was quiet. She was thinking about the shape of it, the architecture of the trap she was standing inside. Someone had put her here, had found her, broke, exhausted, alone at 2 a.m, and had put her inside this specific situation because she was the kind of person who could be put there. The kind of person who signed things in moving cars. The kind of person who could be used. She hated that with a sharpness that surprised her. Not the situation, the being used. The being seen as something that could be picked up and placed and put down again. I want to know everything, she said. I want names. I want the organizational structure. I want to understand what I'm actually walking into when you take me to these rooms. Don't protect me from it. That's not an agreement I'm willing to operate under. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, she said. Below them, Las Vegas burned with its lights, extravagant and indifferent. And somewhere in the glittering machinery of that city, in some room behind some glass, someone was watching the marriage they had engineered and calculating their next move. They didn't know that Mara Ellison had stopped being someone who got moved. She was just starting to figure out, in the cold and quiet of a penthouse 40 floors above everything she had known, that she was someone who could move things back. She was still standing at the window an hour later when her phone, the one Roman had given her, buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. 3 words. Ask him everything. And below that, a photograph. A photograph of Roman from some months past standing in a room she didn't recognize, with a man she didn't recognize, shaking hands over a table on which, just visible at the edge of the frame, sat a document. The same document she had signed. She stared at the image for a long time. Then she walked to the sitting room door and knocked. Roman opened the door on the second knock. He had taken off his jacket. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm, and he was holding a phone that he lowered when he saw her face. Whatever he had been about to say died somewhere in his throat. "Show me your hands," Mara said. He blinked. "What?" She held up the phone, his phone, the one he'd given her, with the photograph on the screen. She turned it so he could see it clearly. She watched his face the way she had learned to watch rooms, the way she'd learned to track a crowd from a stage. Not one thing at a time, but everything at once, all the small involuntary movements that happened before the performed ones. What she saw was not guilt. What she saw was recognition, and then something harder and colder behind it, the specific expression of a man who has just understood the shape of something he had not previously seen clearly. "Where did that come from?" he said. "Unknown number. Texted to your phone." She kept the screen facing him. "That's you in the picture." "Yes." "And that's the document I signed." It appears to be Roman. She said his name, and it was the first time she had used it, and both of them registered that briefly in the silence. I told you I needed the whole picture. I told you that was the condition. So right now, before I take one more step into whatever this is, you're going to tell me what that photograph means. He looked at it for another moment. Then he stepped back from the doorway. Come in. The sitting room was dim, lit by a single lamp in the corner that threw long shadows up the walls. He went to the window and stood with his back to it, which put his face in partial shadow and the city behind him in full light, the strip's glow haloing him in neon orange and white. She stood near the door. She did not sit. 3 months ago, he said, I was approached by a man named Declan Price. He runs legal operations for a private equity group that has been trying to acquire controlling interest in 3 of my casino properties. He came to me with what he described as a partnership proposal. We met twice. Second meeting, he brought documents, preliminary agreements, non-binding, the kind of paperwork that happens in early negotiations. He paused. I did not sign anything substantive. The talks fell apart within a week. Price's group didn't have the liquidity they claimed. But someone photographed the meeting, apparently, and put it on a document that looks like the contract I signed. The photograph has been edited, he said. The document in that image is not what was on the table that night. Someone has placed a different document under my hands, digitally. She absorbed this. So it's fabricated. The document in the image is fabricated. The meeting was real. And who benefits from making it look like you prearranged my marriage? He was quiet for a moment. Someone who wants to prove I planned this, that I knowingly acquired a wife through fraud. That removes the sympathetic reading, the one where we were both drugged, both used, and replaces it with a narrative where I'm the architect, which makes you liable, which makes me illegitimate. The word came out with an edge that was the first genuinely uncontrolled thing she'd heard from him. There are people on my board who would use that to trigger a no-confidence vote. There are people outside my organization who would use it to call federal attention to the Calder holdings. And there is one specific person. He stopped. Say it, she said. Silas Vorn. The name came out flat and deliberate. He controls the Eastern Casino Corridor. He has been trying to take Calder territory for 2 years through legal challenges, land acquisition, and another pause, shorter, other methods. He has the resources to stage what happened last night. He has the motive to leak it to the press. And he has the specific interest in my succession deadline that would make this timing make sense. Mara was quiet. She was looking at the photograph on the phone, at the careful way it had been constructed. Real meeting, real hands, false document, the patience of it, the precision. He knew about the succession clause, she said. Someone told him. Someone inside. She looked up. You have a traitor. Roman looked at her. In the dim room with the city behind him, he looked like someone who had known that for longer than tonight and had been carrying it the way you carry something that you cannot put down because putting it down would mean stopping to feel the weight of it. Yes, he said. She put the phone on the side table between them. She crossed her arms and leaned her shoulder against the doorframe, not to be casual, but because her body needed something to push against. Her mind was running the architecture of it, the way she used to map choreography, not step by step, but structurally, the whole shape of the movement at once, where the weight was, where the momentum was going. Whoever sent me that photo, she said, wants me to distrust you. Yes, which means they're worried about what happens if I don't. He said nothing. Which means they think I'm a variable. She straightened up. They thought they were putting a hostage in your house, someone you'd have to manage, contain, explain, someone scared enough or angry enough to be worked against you. She paused. They miscalculated. Roman looked at her for a long moment. You're very calm. I'm furious, she said precisely. There's a difference. He was quiet. Then slowly, something in his posture changed. Not dramatically, not visibly enough that anyone not watching carefully would catch it, but she was watching carefully, and what she saw was a man letting go of something he had been holding at arm's length all day. Some practiced distance, some operational formality that had been useful and was now, in this specific moment, getting in the way. Garvey will trace the number that sent the text, he said. Tonight. Good. And tomorrow, there's an event. A private dinner. 3 members of my board and their associates. It was scheduled before any of this. Canceling it signals instability. He looked at her steadily. I need you there. As your wife. As yourself. Who happens to also be my wife. She considered that distinction. What do I need to know going in? I'll brief you in the morning. Brief me now, she said. I don't sleep well with incomplete information. The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, the architecture of one. Neither do I, he said. They sat across from each other at the table in the sitting room until past midnight. He talked. She listened and asked questions and pushed back when his answers were shaped rather than complete, which was often enough that he eventually stopped shaping them and started simply answering. She learned the names of his board members, their allegiances, their financial interests, the specific flavor of their ambitions. She learned the history of the Calder Group, not the public version, the architecture beneath it, the agreements and understandings that held the structure upright. She learned that Roman had inherited an empire he had not designed, and had spent 5 years since his father's death trying to legitimate it piece by piece, converting black market holdings into licensed operations, quietly exiting arrangements that couldn't be cleaned, building towards something that could survive daylight. That this was not universally popular, that several of the people around him had profited from the old arrangement and did not want to see it dismantled. She learned that he had not been looking for a wife, that the succession clause had been something he was aware of and had been managing, not by planning to comply with it, but by planning to challenge it legally before his birthday. That someone had moved faster than his attorneys. She learned in the specific way you learn things about people when you sit with them past midnight in a room with no audience, that Roman Calder was rigidly, almost pathologically honest in one-on-one conversation, that the composure was real, but so was what lived under it, that he was someone who had been performing control for so long that he had nearly forgotten the performance was not the same as the thing itself. At 12:40, she stood up and said she was going to sleep. He said, "Thank you." She stopped. For what? He looked at the table, at the papers they'd been going through. For not running. The door's locked, she said. Not anymore. He met her eyes. I had it unlocked 2 hours ago. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep well anyway. The morning arrived with Claire and coffee and a schedule that had been revised overnight to accommodate a security briefing at 9 and a fitting, which Mara had not agreed to and said so clearly to Claire, who absorbed the objection with the practiced grace of someone who had been managing difficult situations for a long time and said she would adjust the schedule. The fitting, it turned out, was non-optional in the logistical sense, because the dinner that evening had a dress code that Mara's wardrobe, transferred from her apartment in 2 duffel bags and a cardboard box, did not accommodate. She sat in the chair while Claire laid out options with quiet efficiency and reminded herself that this was tactical, not personal. Being dressed for the room was the same as being prepared for the room. She chose something dark and structural, not ornamental, not soft. Something that said present, not decorative. The security briefing was run by a man named Holt, who was built like a wall and spoke in the specific clipped shorthand of someone for whom language was purely functional. He walked her through the evening's logistics, the layout of the venue, the positions his team would hold, the signals she should use if she felt compromised. She paid attention. She asked 2 questions that made Holt pause and look at her with the slight recalibration she was getting used to seeing in the men around Roman, the look of someone adjusting their category for her. Roman appeared at 11, in a suit that was dark and precisely fitted, and stood in the doorway of the sitting room, watching her go through the briefing notes she'd made on a legal pad. He didn't say anything for a moment. "You take notes," he said. "I choreographed dance pieces for 4 years. Notation is a habit." She didn't look up. Holt said there are 3 exits from the private dining room. He's covering 2. What's at the 3rd? A service corridor that runs to the kitchen and out to the loading area. Holt's team has eyes on it remotely. Remote eyes have delays. Holt's people are good. I'm sure they are. She looked up. I'd feel better with a body on it. Roman looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Holt. She went back to her notes. The dinner was at a private venue connected to one of Roman's casino properties. A room above the main floor, accessible only by a dedicated elevator with key access, furnished in the particular heavy opulence of spaces designed to make business feel like leisure. She walked in beside Roman and felt the room recalibrate around their entrance, the specific social physics of attention reorganizing itself around a new variable. There were 7 people at the table. She had memorized their names and rough profiles from the midnight briefing. Marcus Webb, board member, 63, real estate interests, old money Vegas, cautiously loyal to Roman. Petra Gavin, associate, 50s, ran 2 of the casino's entertainment operations, sharp and difficult to read. The others arranged around them, staff and spouses and one man, younger, late 30s, dark eyes, too easy smile, who had been introduced as a guest of Webb's named Fletcher and who had not been in any briefing file. She noted him. She filed him. The dinner moved the way these dinners moved, expensive food served by invisible staff, conversation that was about other things than what it was about. The elaborate performance of ease among people who were calculating constantly. She played her role without playing it, which was the only way to do it. She was not pretending to be Roman's wife. She was simply herself in this room, which turned out to be more disarming than any performance would have been. Webb's wife asked her how she and Roman had met. Unexpectedly, she said, and smiled, and Webb's wife laughed in a way that said she assumed this was a romantic evasion, which was technically accurate. Fletcher watched her across the table for most of the first course. Not obviously, not rudely, but she was trained to feel the weight of eyes, and his were on her more than casual interest warranted. When the conversation shifted and gave her an angle, she turned to him directly. "I don't think I caught your connection to Marcus," she said. "Old friends," Fletcher said. His smile was the kind that reached the eyes precisely as much as calculated, not 1 millimeter further. "And you? Vegas native?" "Transplant, I came for the lights. Most people come for the lights. Most people leave." "I stayed," she said simply. "So I see." His eyes went to her ring briefly and back. "Roman's a lucky man." "He'd say the situation is more complicated than luck," she said. Something shifted in Fletcher's expression. Too small to name. She filed it. After dinner, while the group moved to a lounge area for drinks, she found a moment when Roman was engaged with Webb and touched his arm. He turned toward her immediately, the first instinctive thing she'd seen him do, the turn without the pause. "Fletcher," she said quietly. "He wasn't in any file." Roman's eyes were already moving across the room in the way of someone who had been doing this for years. "Webb brought him last minute. Garvey's running him. He watches me specifically, not you, me." Roman's jaw tightened. The movement was small and controlled, but she was close enough to see it. "How specific?" "Like he's assessing a problem, not admiring a view." Roman's hand, which had been loose at his side, closed briefly. Opened again. "Stay close to Petra Gavin for the next 20 minutes. She's safe, and she'll talk your ear off, which gives you cover." "What are you going to do?" "Have a conversation with Webb," he said, "about his guest list." She crossed to Petra Gavin, who did indeed talk her ear off about a renovation project in one of the casino's showrooms, and she listened and responded and kept Fletcher in her peripheral vision the entire time. He moved through the room at a careful social pace, stopping to speak with 2 of the other board associates, refilling his drink, laughing at something Petra had apparently said to someone earlier. He was smooth. He was practiced. At 8:47, he stepped out toward the corridor that led to the restrooms. And something in the specific way he moved, purposeful, fractionally too fast for someone who just needed the bathroom, made her set down her glass. She followed him. The corridor was carpeted and quiet, the noise of the room behind her muffled. Fletcher had not gone to the restrooms. He was standing at the far end of the corridor near a service door, phone to his ear, back to her. She stopped. She breathed shallowly. She listened. She could not hear his words clearly. He was speaking low and fast, the register of someone saying something they did not want to say slowly. But she heard 3 things with clarity because they were said with slightly more force than the rest. She heard, "tomorrow." She heard, "the mother." She heard her own name. She stood in the corridor for 2 heartbeats after he ended the call and turned and saw her. His face went through 3 expressions in less than a second: surprise, assessment, recovery. And then the easy smile was back and he said, "Mrs. Calder, are you lost?" "No," she said. Are you? He looked at her. The smile stayed exactly where it was. Just needed some air. Service corridors aren't known for their air quality, she said. The smile thinned, just slightly. Excuse me, he said, and moved past her back toward the lounge. She stood in the corridor alone and felt the specific cold of knowing something before she could prove it. The cold of the mother. Her mother. In a hospital bed with monitors and a too small room and visiting hours and no security, because why would there be security? She was a seamstress. She was nobody. She was just a woman whose daughter had accidentally married into something dangerous. She walked back to the lounge. She found Roman's eyes immediately, from across the room, and the look she gave him was not subtle. He excused himself from Webb without finishing his sentence. He reached her in 40 seconds. "We need to leave," she said. "Talk to me." Fletcher was on a phone call in the service corridor. I heard my name, and I heard the mother, and I heard tomorrow. We need to get to Desert Springs tonight, right now. Roman was already moving, hand at her back, steering without gripping, and she heard him say 2 words into his earpiece that she couldn't parse, but that produced within 90 seconds, Holt materializing from somewhere, and the elevator arriving before they reached it, and the SUVs at the street door already running. In the car, she sat straight and did not let herself feel the fear fully, because feeling it fully would make it real in a way she couldn't function inside. She breathed. She watched the city go past the window at the velocity of controlled urgency. "If Vorn is moving on my mother," she started. "He won't get to her." Roman's voice was flat and certain. "You don't know that. I know what my team can do in 40 minutes when I tell them the target. She's not a target. She's a 61-year-old woman with a cardiac condition who doesn't know anything about any of this. I know." The word came out differently than the others. Heavier, like he meant it more than the operational language around it. "I know that, Mara." She looked at him. The city lights moved across his face in passing intervals, and in between them, in the dark, she could see what he actually looked like when he wasn't performing composure for a room full of people who needed to believe in it. He looked tired, not the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept. The deeper kind. The kind that lives under things. "Why is Vorn doing this?" she said. "Really, not the territory, the real reason." Roman looked out his window. "Because I'm trying to clean up what my father built. And cleaning it up means exposing things that other people would rather stay buried. Vorn's entire operation depends on the infrastructure my family created. If I legitimize the Calder holdings, he loses the protective cover that infrastructure provided. So he needs you to fail. He needs me to either fail or be too compromised to act. A scandal, a federal inquiry, a no-confidence vote. Any of those buys him years. And using you is elegant," Roman said, with the specific bitterness of someone admiring a move they hate. "I didn't choose you. I don't have an emotional attachment to protect. That should make you easy to discard. Except..." He stopped. "Except," she said. He looked at her. "Except you're not discardable. Whoever picked you underestimated that." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked forward. The SUV was doing 80 on an empty stretch of road, the hospital a mile ahead, and Holt's voice was already coming through the vehicle's speaker, confirming that his team was on the cardiac floor, that the room was secured, that Diane Ellison was awake and confused but physically stable. Mara let out a breath, and then Holt said something else. His voice, which was always flat, went a register flatter. "Boss, we've got a problem. Hospital security just flagged 2 men in the parking structure, armed. They're not medical staff and they're not ours." Roman's hand closed on the door handle. "How long ago?" he said. 4 minutes. Security's holding them at the entrance, but..." A pause. "There's a third. We didn't see him until he was already in the building." Mara was moving before the car fully stopped. Roman caught her arm. Not rough, but absolute. "You don't go in without me. That's my mother. And those are armed men, and you go in with me, or you don't go in." His eyes on hers were serious and direct and left no room for argument that she had time for. "Together, or not at all." She looked at him for 1 second. "Together," she said. They went in together, and the night fractured around them into something that could not be walked back from. And somewhere on the 4th floor of Desert Springs Medical, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, Diane Ellison was waiting without knowing what was coming for her, or what her daughter had already become in the hours since she'd walked out of that room and into a city that had decided she was a piece on someone else's board. She was done being a piece. She just didn't know yet what it would cost her to become something else. The third man was named Cutter. Holt's team found him on the stairwell between the third and fourth floors, pressed into the angle of the wall where the security camera had a 2-second blind spot on its rotation cycle. He was carrying a phone and a folded document and no visible weapon, which was worse than a weapon because it meant he wasn't there to shoot anyone. He was there to deliver something or collect something, or both. Holt had him face down on the landing by the time Roman and Mara came through the stairwell door, and the man was not fighting it, which was also worse because people who don't fight restraint have already decided the restraint doesn't matter. Mara went past all of it, past Holt, past the man on the floor, past Roman's hand reaching for her arm again, and she took the stairs to the fourth floor at a pace that was not quite running, because running meant panic, and she was not going to panic in a hospital stairwell. She was going to move fast and controlled and get to her mother's room and verify with her own eyes that the thing she needed to be true was true. Diane Ellison was sitting up in her hospital bed when Mara came through the door. She was alive. She was unhurt. She was looking at the large man in a black suit standing inside her room near the window with the expression of someone who has questions that have been escalating in urgency for the past 10 minutes and is approaching the outer limit of her patience. "Would someone," Diane said, "like to tell me why there is a man the size of a refrigerator standing in my room at 9:30 at night?" "He's with me," Mara said. "You don't have men." "I do now." Mara crossed to the bed and took her mother's hand and held it, and she let herself have exactly 5 seconds of the feeling that came with that. The specific relief of a fear not realized, the loosening of something that had been wound tight since she'd heard Holt's voice in the car. And then she put it away and came back to functional. "Are you okay?" she said. "I'm fine. I've been fine. I've been trying to tell everyone I'm fine for 3 weeks. Diane looked past her at the door. "Is that him?" Mara turned. Roman had come into the room. He stopped just inside the doorway, not entering fully, not retreating, occupying the threshold with the particular uncertainty of a man who has very clear operational competence in most spaces and is currently in one where none of it applies. "Diane Ellison," Mara said. Roman called her. Diane looked at him for a long moment with the eyes that saw through things. Roman met her gaze and did not look away, which Mara noted. "You're the husband," Diane said. "Yes, ma'am." "She told me it was complicated." She was accurate. Diane looked at her daughter. Something passed between them that didn't need words. The compressed, efficient communication of two people who have been each other's entire family for a long time. Then Diane settled back against her pillow and said, "All right, someone tell me what's actually happening." They didn't tell her everything. They told her enough, that Mara's new situation had created some security concerns, that precautions were being taken, that she was not to worry. Diane listened with the focused attention of a woman who had always understood that the version of events she received was the managed version, and filed her objections for a later conversation and said she was tired and wanted to sleep. At the door, she stopped Mara with a hand on her wrist. "That man," she said quietly, nodding toward Roman, who had moved into the corridor. "He looks at you like he's already lost something he didn't know he had." Mara looked at her mother. "Don't break his heart if you can help it," Diane said, "and don't let him break yours." "Mom, I'm tired, baby. Go do whatever it is you're doing." Mara went. In the corridor, Roman was on the phone. His voice was low and controlled, and she caught fragments. Garvey's name, something about a filing, something about Fletcher's known associates. Holt was at the elevator with two of his men. The man named Cutter was gone. Moved, Mara assumed, to somewhere more private and less regulated than a hospital stairwell. She went to Roman. She waited until he ended the call. "The document Cutter was carrying," she said. "Garvey has it." "What's in it?" Roman looked at her. His jaw was set in the way that meant he was deciding how to phrase something, which was the tell she had already learned to watch for, the half-second delay that preceded a shaped answer rather than a complete one. "Tell me straight," she said. "It's a deposition form," he said. "Pre-filled. It's a statement attributed to you claiming that Roman Calder approached you, offered you money in exchange for participation in a staged marriage, and coerced you into signing the contract under duress." She absorbed this. Attributed to me, that I didn't write, that you haven't signed, yet. He held her gaze. Cutter's job was to get to you tonight, either to get your actual signature on it, by whatever means, or to photograph you in a compromised enough position that the document's credibility could be established without your cooperation. The hallway was quiet around them, the sounds of the hospital floor, monitors, distant voices, the mechanical regularity of an institution running through the night, continuing indifferently around the specific nature of what he had just said. Vorn needed my signature, she said. Or a reasonable facsimile of your cooperation, yes. She turned this over. The architecture of it, the patience of it, staging the marriage, leaking it to the press, planting the photograph on his phone, sending men to the hospital not to harm her mother, but to pressure her, to demonstrate access, to make her feel surrounded. It was not impulsive. It was a designed sequence. He's been building this for months, she said. Longer. And you knew someone was building towards something. I knew I had opposition. I didn't know the mechanism. But someone inside your organization did. She looked at him. Fletcher? Fletcher is Vorn's man. We confirmed that in the last 20 minutes. Webb didn't know. He was used to get Fletcher into the room. Roman paused. Fletcher's been inside my circle for 8 months, as Webb's associate, attending events, building familiarity. 8 months? She thought about the photograph, the staged meeting with Price, the document edited to put a different paper under Roman's hands. 8 months of construction, of patience. Who else, she said. He was quiet. Roman. Who else inside is Vorn's? The pause was 3 seconds long. She counted them. That's what I'm trying to determine. That's not an answer. It's the honest one. He looked at her steadily. I don't know. I have suspicions. I don't have confirmation. And given what's happened in the last 24 hours, I'm not confident in my ability to trust my own assessment of the people around me. She looked at him for a long moment. This was the most undefended thing he had said to her. Not the facts of it. The admission of not knowing was operational, practical, but the texture of it. The specific way he said, I'm not confident in my ability to trust my own assessment. That was not a man performing vulnerability. That was a man stating a real condition at real cost. Garvey, she said, do you trust him? Yes. Holt? Yes. Claire? He didn't hesitate. Yes. Then those are the people we work with. Cut everyone else to operational minimum until you know. She held his gaze. You said you'd tell me the whole picture. That goes both ways. If I'm going to be in rooms for you, I need to know immediately when anything changes. Not managed, not delayed. Immediately. Agreed. They left the hospital at 10:45 with Holt's full team around them, and the drive back to the penthouse was quiet, in the specific way of two people processing in parallel, each running their own calculation, neither needing to fill the silence with something it didn't require. She was almost asleep when the thought arrived. It came the way the real ones always came. Not announced, not built toward, just suddenly present like something that had been waiting for the noise to stop. She sat with it for a moment in the dark of her suite, listening to the muffled sound of the city 40 floors below. And then she got up and went to the sitting room and knocked on Roman's door. He answered in 30 seconds. He had not been sleeping either. Garvey, she said. I need to talk to Garvey tonight, right now. He read her face. Why? The succession clause, the organizational charter. Who has access to it? Who knew about the 33rd birthday deadline? Roman went still. Garvey, my father's former attorney, who is retired. 2 members of the board. A pause. And my father's personal secretary, who has been with the organization for 30 years and currently manages historical documentation. What's his name? Her name, Constance Arden. Did Vorn have a relationship with your father? Roman's face changed. Not dramatically. The way a structure changes when one load-bearing element shifts. The whole thing redistributing, recalculating. They had a business relationship in the early years, before my father consolidated and Vorn went independent. Constance Arden has been there 30 years. Yes. Since before Vorn went independent. The silence between them was the specific silence of an answer that didn't need to be spoken. They called Garvey at 11:15. He arrived at the penthouse at midnight with 2 associates and a laptop and the controlled urgency of a man who had been expecting a call like this and had been dreading it. He sat at the table in the main sitting room and pulled up files with the quiet efficiency of someone navigating a structure he knew well. Constance Arden had been with the Calder organization for 31 years. She had full access to the charter documentation, the succession provisions, the organizational bylaws. She had been the primary liaison between Roman's father and the network of attorneys and notaries who handled private organizational matters. She had, Garvey found in 40 minutes of document tracing, authorized the notary certification on Roman and Mara's marriage filing. Not filed it, authorized it. Her credentials, her registry access, her standing as an organizational records officer, used by someone who had her authorization code. She gave someone her code, Roman said. His voice was controlled. His hands on the table were flat and very still. Or someone took it, Garvey said carefully. Is there a difference? Garvey was quiet. Call her, Mara said. Right now, tonight. Don't wait until morning. Roman looked at her. Then he looked at Garvey. Something passed between them, the look of 2 men who know the same thing and are deciding who acknowledges it first. She won't answer, Garvey said. She went on medical leave 4 days ago. I've been unable to reach her since. 4 days ago. 2 days before the staged marriage. Mara sat back in her chair. The room felt different now. Same furniture, same light, same city through the windows, but the geometry of it had shifted. The walls closer in the specific way of a space that has just revealed itself to be smaller than it looked. She didn't just give someone her code, Mara said slowly. She's gone. She went on leave and disappeared before the filing, before the press leak, before any of it. She looked at Roman. She knew what was coming. Roman's jaw worked once. He breathed through his nose, slow and deliberate. She's been with us since before I was born. I know. My father trusted her completely. I know. Mara kept her voice even. Not soft, even. That's what made her useful. The room was quiet. Garvey was looking at his laptop with the focused attention of a man giving 2 people space to have a moment he was not part of. One of his associates had stepped into the corridor. The city below pulsed with its indifferent light. Roman stood up from the table. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room, hands at his sides, looking at Las Vegas. She watched the line of his shoulders, the specific tension in them. 31 years. Someone who had known him as a child, someone his father had trusted. Someone who had sat inside the structure and fed its architecture to its enemy with the patience of someone who had always intended, eventually, to do exactly that. I'm sorry, she said. He didn't turn around. Don't. Roman? I said don't. It came out flat and hard, and then, almost immediately, he pulled it back. His shoulders dropped a fraction. I'm not... That wasn't for you. I'm sorry. You don't have to manage it right now. Yes, I do. He turned around. His face was controlled again, but the eyes were not. The eyes were doing something complicated, something that had the specific texture of a man who has just understood that a betrayal goes deeper than he had yet allowed himself to calculate. I always have to manage it. That's the position. She looked at him across the room. That's the worst part of what you do, she said. Isn't it? Not the danger, not the enemies, the managing. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. That's the worst part. Garvey cleared his throat with the careful politeness of a man who has been present for something he respects. There's more, he said. Both of them looked at him. He turned the laptop to face them. Constance Arden's access logs show activity going back 14 months. Specific documents accessed, copied, sent through an encrypted external relay. He paused. The succession clause documentation, the notary registry credentials, the charter provisions governing board votes. Another pause, heavier. And a financial record, a series of transfers from a Calder holding account to an account I cannot immediately trace, executed over the last 8 months, that aggregate to, he said the number. It was a large number, large enough that it wasn't just operational sabotage, it was systematic stripping. someone dismantling a structure from inside, moving its material to somewhere else, piece by piece, slowly enough that no single transaction would trigger an audit flag. She's been stealing from the organization, Roman said. On someone's behalf, yes. The destination account has a structure consistent with Vorn's financial operations, but I can't confirm that until morning when I can access. Confirm it, Roman said. Tonight, whatever it takes. Garvey nodded and was already on his phone. Mara looked at the financial record on the laptop screen, at the dates, at the careful spacing of the transactions, each one calibrated to stay beneath the threshold that would generate automatic review. She thought about the patience that required, the planning, the years of it. Vorn didn't just want your territory, she said. Roman looked at her. He wanted the money to fund the takeover. He's been using your own organization to finance the campaign against you. She looked up. The transfers. They started 8 months ago. Same time Fletcher began appearing as Webb's associate. He built the whole mechanism simultaneously. The funding, the internal access, the social penetration. She paused. This isn't opportunism. This is something he's been building for the better part of a year, which means, Roman said slowly, that the succession clause wasn't the trigger. It was the deadline he was already working toward. He would have moved against me regardless. The 33rd birthday just gave him a specific window. And Constance gave him the charter, Mara said. So he knew the window. He planned to it. The room was very quiet. Roman sat back down. He put his elbows on the table and his hands over his face and stayed like that for a moment. 4 seconds. 5. And she let him have it. Did not speak. Did not look away. Then he dropped his hands and he was composed again, but differently composed than before. Not the performance of it. The thing itself, arrived at through the 4 seconds, real and chosen and hard. The summit, he said. Vorn has requested a formal summit. Neutral territory, all major interests present, 1 week from now. He filed the request this morning through the consortium. He looked at her. It's a setup. He's going to come with the deposition, the photograph, the financial narrative, and he's going to present a case for my removal in front of every major player in the city. He's going to do it publicly, Mara said, in the room where it matters most. Yes. So we have a week. Yes. She looked at the laptop screen, at the financial records, at the dates of the transfers, at the architecture of a betrayal that had been constructed with more patience and more precision than anything she had previously understood herself to be inside. She thought about Constance Arden, 31 years, trusted completely, gone 4 days ago. She thought about Fletcher in the service corridor, tomorrow, the mother. She thought about the deposition form pre-filled with her name and her supposed statement. She thought about what it meant to be someone that other people treated as a piece, something movable, something without agency, something that could be picked up and placed and used and put down. She was done with that. She was so completely, entirely done with that. Garvey, she said, the financial records. Where did Constance send them from? What device? What location? Garvey looked at his laptop. The transfers were authorized from a registered device in, he paused, the Calder Group's records archive, 3rd floor of the main casino building. Is the archive still accessible? It's under organizational key access. Roman has the primary authorization. She looked at Roman. What's in the archive? Everything, he said. 30 years of organizational records. My grandfather's, my father's, mine. Including the original charter documents. Yes. And the original succession provisions. Not Vorn's version. Not Constance's version. The actual originals, with whatever annotations and amendments and context they were created with. Roman looked at her slowly. She watched him catch the shape of what she was building toward. Saw the moment he got there. The slight change in his eyes that was the closest thing he had to visible surprise. You think there's something in the original documents, he said. I think Vorn went to a lot of trouble to control the narrative around those documents, she said. The charter, the succession clause. He used Constance to access copies, to understand the provisions, to time his move. She leaned forward, but he needed Constance because he couldn't get to the originals himself. The originals are in your archive, under your key. And if the original succession provision says something different, or has conditions that Vorn's version doesn't include, or amendments, or context that makes the 33rd birthday deadline less absolute than he's been treating it. She held his gaze. We go to the archive. We read the original. And then we build what we bring to that summit. He looked at her for a moment. We, she said, not softly, as a statement of position. I'm not collateral anymore, Roman. I'm not the wife you're protecting or the liability you're managing. I'm the woman who heard Fletcher in that corridor and who traced the notary authorization and who is telling you right now that we have 7 days and we are not going to spend them waiting for Vorn to destroy you. She paused. We go on a fence. Tonight, if possible. Tomorrow, at the latest. The room was very still. Garvey was looking at his laptop with the studied non-expression of a man who was absolutely listening. Roman Calder looked at Mara Ellison, at the woman who had been put in the back of a car and handed a document and used as a chess piece by people who had calculated that she was the kind of person who could be used, and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, The archive opens at 6 a.m. I have the key. Then we're up at 5, she said. He nodded once. He pulled out his phone and began making calls. She went to the window and looked at the city and breathed and let herself feel, for exactly the length of one breath, how frightened she actually was. How far she had come from the woman standing on the sidewalk outside the Velvet Lux with her shoes in her hand. How completely the shape of her life had changed in less than 48 hours, driven by someone else's design, detonated around her while she was tired and desperate and not looking. One breath. Then she turned away from the window and went to help Roman plan the thing that would either save him or end them both. Because she had made a choice in the corridor of a hospital stairwell when she'd said together and meant it. And choices, she had always believed, were the one thing that the archive smelled like old paper and cold air and 30 years of things that had been put down and not picked up again. Roman unlocked it at 6:12 in the morning with a physical key, not a card, not a code, an actual cut metal key on a plain ring, and pushed the door open and hit the lights, which came on in sections, fluorescent and unforgiving, revealing rows of shelving units that ran the length of a room the size of a tennis court. Steel shelving, labeled boxes, filing systems that predated digital record keeping and had simply continued alongside it because some people, Roman's grandfather apparently among them, did not trust what they could not hold. Mara went in first. She had slept 2 hours. She knew this because she had looked at the clock at 3:40 and again at 5:50, and the space between those 2 points had been largely occupied by her staring at the ceiling of her suite, running the architecture of what she was trying to find and why it mattered, and what Vorn would do if she was wrong about any of it. Her eyes felt like they'd been rinsed with sand. She didn't care. Charter documents, she said. Where? Roman moved to the far left section of shelving and pulled a box without hesitating. He knew this room, she realized, had been in it before, had probably spent time in here in the years since his father died, learning what he had inherited and what that meant. He put the box on the central work table and opened it. The original charter was a physical document, typed on heavy stock with annotations in 2 different hands and amendments paperclipped to specific sections with the careful organization of someone who had treated it as a living document. Roman spread it on the table, and they stood side by side and read. The succession clause was on page 9. It was 3 paragraphs in its original form, and the first thing Mara noticed was that the version Garvey had been working from, the digital version in the organizational files, the version Constance had accessed and presumably shared with Vorn, was shorter. Not dramatically. 3 sentences shorter. The last 3 sentences of the second paragraph. She put her finger on the paper. Read this. Roman read it. She watched his face. The missing sentences established a condition on the succession clause's enforcement, a provision that the 33rd birthday deadline applied only in the absence of an active legal challenge to the charter's validity, and that any board vote triggered under the clause was suspended pending resolution of such a challenge. It was the kind of technical language that looked like procedural boilerplate and was, in practice, a pause button. If the charter's succession provision was under active legal contest, the deadline stopped running. She edited the digital version, Mara said. Constance. She removed 3 sentences from the digitized record. Left the original intact because she couldn't touch a physical document without it being noticed, but the digital version is what Garvey and your attorneys have been working from. It's what Vorn has been working from. Roman's hand was on the table beside the document. His knuckles were white. If we file a legal challenge to the Charter's succession clause before the summit, she said, the deadline suspends. Vorn loses the mechanism. The board vote can't be triggered. His entire timeline collapses. He'll contest the challenge. Of course he will. But contesting it takes time. Time he doesn't have. Time that you now have. Roman straightened up. He pulled out his phone and called Garvey and said 4 words. Get to the archive. Then he took a photograph of the original charter page, specifically the paragraph with the missing sentences, with the kind of focused precision of someone who understood that what he was holding was the first real leverage they'd had since this started. Garvey arrived in 18 minutes. He read the original. He read the digital version on his laptop. He sat down in one of the archive's 2 chairs and was quiet for a long moment, with the specific stillness of a man doing rapid legal calculation. I can file a challenge today, he said. It'll be on record before end of business. Vorn won't know until the consortium notifies all parties, which happens within 48 hours of filing. File it, Roman said. There's risk. Filing makes our discovery of the discrepancy public. If Vorn has any remaining access to organizational systems, he'll know we found the original. He'll know at the summit anyway, Mara said. Filing first gives us the clock. Not filing means we walk into that room with a weapon we can't use yet because he still controls the timeline. Garvey looked at her, then at Roman. File it, Roman said again. Garvey opened his laptop. The next 6 days were the most operationally dense of Mara's life, and she had once choreographed a 12-person contemporary piece in 4 days for a festival that had moved its deadline without notice. She understood pressure, and she understood the specific mental discipline of working toward a fixed point when the variables around it kept shifting, but this was different in kind. This had consequences that lived in the body, in the permanent low-grade tension that sat between her shoulder blades, in the quality of her sleep, in the way she had stopped tasting food properly somewhere around day 3. Roman moved through it differently, not more easily. She didn't think anything was easy for him right now. But with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been operating in crisis for years and had built internal systems for it. He compartmentalized with a precision that she found both impressive and faintly alarming. He could be in a room discussing the legal challenge with Garvey and 2 outside attorneys, and 30 minutes later be conducting a completely separate call about casino floor operations, and the seam between those 2 modes was invisible. She asked him about it on day 4, not because she needed to know, but because she was tired and they had been sitting across from each other at the work table in his suite for 6 hours, and she was curious. Practice, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. He looked up from the document he was reading. When my father died, I was 28. I inherited everything he'd built, the organization, the agreements, the infrastructure, the enemies, and I had 48 hours before the first people started testing whether I could hold it. I learned to compartmentalize because the alternative was to let one thing contaminate everything else, and I couldn't afford that. Does it ever stop, the compartmentalizing? He held her gaze for a moment. In here, he said, meaning the room, meaning this specific space they had been living in together for days now, less than it used to. She looked at him for a moment, then she went back to her own documents. She had been building something of her own in those 6 days, piece by piece, methodically, using everything Roman had told her and everything Garvey had pulled from the financial records and everything she had observed in the dinner 2 days before it all fractured open. She had the original charter. She had the financial transfer records with Vorn's account structure. She had the security footage from the hospital parking structure showing Cutter and the 2 armed men, time-stamped and authenticated by Holt. She had the photograph of Roman, the fabricated one, the edited image. And she had a digital forensics contact through one of Garvey's associates who had produced a technical report confirming the document in the image had been composited, the metadata inconsistent with the meeting date. She had one more thing, the deposition form, the pre-filled statement bearing her name that Cutter had been carrying. She had read it carefully, multiple times, and she had noticed something that she suspected Vorn had not expected anyone to notice because he had not expected the woman whose name was on it to be in any position to examine it. The form cited a specific account number as the one through which Roman had allegedly paid her. The account number matched, digit for digit, one of the Calder holding accounts visible in the transfer records, the one Constance had been draining for 8 months, the one that fed into Vaughn's operation. He had used his own laundering infrastructure to fabricate Mara's payment. It was either an oversight or an arrogance. The arrogance of someone who had not expected the evidence chain to be assembled by the person it was designed to destroy. She assembled it anyway. On the morning of the summit, she was awake before the alarm. She had laid out what she needed the night before. The documents in order, the digital copies on a tablet, Garvey's legal filings time-stamped and certified, the forensics report in a separate folder. She dressed without consulting Claire, choosing herself. Dark, structured, nothing ornamental, the same principle she'd applied for the dinner a week ago that now felt like it belonged to a different chapter of a different life. She was at the work table with coffee when Roman came through from his suite. He stopped when he saw the spread of documents. "You organized it," he said. "I choreographed it," she said. "There's a difference. This has a sequence. It has to land in a specific order, or the logic doesn't build properly." He looked at her across the table. He had circles under his eyes that matched hers. He was in a dark suit that he wore the way he wore all his suits, like armor that had been broken in until it fit the body of the person it was protecting. "How are you?" The question surprised her, not the concern in it. She had stopped being surprised by his concern several days ago, but the directness of it, the simplicity. "I'm ready," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "I'm frightened," she said with the same directness. "And I'm angry. And I'm ready." All three, simultaneously. He nodded once. "Good," he said. "That's the right condition." The summit venue was the Monarch Room, a private event space on the 14th floor of the Calder Group's flagship casino, reserved for consortium meetings and high-level negotiations, a room that had seen more consequential conversations than most courtrooms. It seated 40 and was currently configured for 22, with a central table and secondary seating around the perimeter for staff and counsel. They arrived 12 minutes before the start time. Holt's team was already positioned, inside and outside, the casino floor below threaded with his people, the elevator banks monitored, the service access covered by bodies this time, not cameras. Roman had been thorough in the days between. He had been very thorough. Vaughn was already in the room. Mara had not seen him before. She had constructed him from descriptions and from the shape of what he had built, the patience of it, the architecture of it. And she had expected someone who looked like his methods, cold, precise, contained. Silas Vaughn was 60, broad through the chest and shoulders, with gray hair cut close and a face that had the particular quality of someone who had made a decision long ago to let his expressions serve exclusively functional purposes. He wore a light suit and no tie, and he held a glass of water with the ease of a man absolutely comfortable in rooms that other people found high pressure, because he had been the pressure in those rooms for 30 years. He looked at Mara when they entered. Not briefly. He held the look the way you hold something you've been expecting and are assessing against your expectations. She looked back at him without expression and took her seat to Roman's right. The room filled. Board members, consortium representatives, legal counsel, associates. The air took on the particular density of a space that knows something is about to happen. Conversations were clipped and careful. People sat down with the precision of those who had chosen their positions deliberately. Vaughn opened without preamble. He was that kind of man. "I've called this summit because I believe there is a material question about the legitimacy of current Calder Group leadership," he said. His voice was level and unhurried, the voice of someone who had run this sequence in his head enough times that the live version was simply a formality. Specifically, questions about the circumstances of Roman Calder's recent marriage, the validity of his compliance with organizational succession requirements, and evidence of financial misconduct in the management of Calder Holdings. He placed documents on the table. His counsel distributed copies to the attendees. Mara looked at the copy in front of her. The deposition form, her name, the fabricated statement. She kept her face neutral. "The deposition before you," Vaughn continued, "is a statement from Mara Ellison, Roman Calder's current wife, confirming that her participation in the marriage was secured through financial inducement and coercion. This," he placed the photograph, "documents a prearranged meeting between Roman Calder and parties involved in staging the marriage ceremony. And this, financial documents, printed clean, shows a pattern of asset transfers from Calder Holdings that represent a significant breach of organizational fiduciary responsibility. He sat back. He folded his hands. He looked at Roman with the patience of someone who has been waiting a long time for a moment and is now inside it. Roman did not speak immediately. He let the room breathe. He had told her this was deliberate, that reacting immediately was what Vorn expected, that the first few seconds of silence were his, not Vorn's. Then Mara spoke instead. "The deposition is fabricated," she said. Her voice carried cleanly in the room. She had pitched it not for the man across from her, but for the room, for the 22 people in it who were currently in the process of deciding what they believed. "I didn't write it, I didn't authorize it, and I can prove it." She opened the tablet. She placed it where the consortium chair could see the screen. A man named Aldridge, 65, independent, whose opinion in this room carried weight that Vorn knew, and she knew, and everyone present knew. This is a technical forensics report from a certified digital analyst. It establishes that the deposition document was generated from a template and populated with my name without my signature or authorization. It also identifies the document's metadata as inconsistent with the date it purports to have been created. A report commissioned by the Calder Group, Vorn's counsel started. "Commissioned by me," Mara said, "personally, through an analyst with no organizational affiliation. The contact information for verification is on the last page." She paused one beat. "The photograph is also fabricated. The same report addresses the image. The document visible under Roman Calder's hands has been digitally composited." The original meeting between Roman and the Price Group was a routine preliminary negotiation that collapsed within a week. The document in the photograph was not present at that meeting. The metadata in the image file confirms post-production alteration. The room was very quiet. Vorn's expression had not changed, but something behind it had. Something in the absolute stillness of a man who is recalibrating in real time and not letting the recalibration show. "The financial transfers," she continued, "are real, but they are not Roman's misconduct. They are yours." She put the financial records on the table. "These are the actual transfer records from the Calder holding account. Every transaction, every destination, traced through 3 intermediate accounts to a holding structure consistent with Vorn Group operations." She looked directly at Vorn. "Your organization has been receiving systematic transfers from Calder Holdings for 8 months, facilitated by an internal actor who has since disappeared. The account number cited in the fabricated deposition as evidence of Roman paying me for the marriage is the same account feeding your operation. You used your own laundering infrastructure to build the frame." Vorn set down his water glass. The movement was small and controlled. "These are accusations. These are records," she said. "Certified copies. The originals are with our legal team and with a federal contact who received them this morning." She let that land. By this morning, I mean before this meeting started. The room broke into simultaneous conversation. Not chaos, but the specific fractured noise of 22 people processing a shift in the fundamental information state of the situation they were sitting inside. Aldridge leaned forward, picking up the financial document. 2 other board members were in close conversation with their counsel. Roman was still and watchful beside her, and she could feel the specific quality of his stillness. Not passive, the stillness of a man who has committed to a plan and is letting it run. Vorn looked at her across the table. His expression was finally doing something. Not defeat, not panic, but a new kind of assessment. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her when she walked in, but with the specific recalibration of someone who had put a variable in a box and watched it walk out of the box and stand in front of him. "You've been busy," he said. "I've had a week," she said. "The charter challenge?" he said. Not a question. "Filed 4 days ago. The succession deadline is suspended pending resolution. The board vote you were planning to trigger doesn't have a mechanism." She held his gaze. "Whatever you brought into this room today, Mr. Vorn, the floor it was built on is gone." Something happened in Vorn's eyes, something cold and decisive that she recognized as a man switching from one strategy to another without mourning the first. He looked at Roman. "You should control your wife," he said, "before she makes this worse." Roman's hand on the table was very still. His voice, when he spoke, was the quietest thing in the room. She's the reason you're not walking out of here on your own terms. I'd choose different words. Vorn stood. And then three things happened very fast. The doors at the far end of the room opened and two men came in who were not consortium staff and not Holt's people. They were Vorn's. She realized immediately from the way they moved and the way Vorn's posture changed at their entry, a micro-adjustment of someone receiving a signal. At the same moment, Holt's voice came through the earpiece Roman was wearing, and she could not hear the words, but she saw Roman's jaw set in the specific way that meant bad information arriving in real time. And in the same compressed 3 seconds, Vorn reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a phone and placed it on the table face up and said 2 words. Play it. The phone's screen showed a video. Hospital room. Her mother's room. She writes, she recognized it in the first frame, the window, the particular shape of the monitor on the wall. The video was from the previous night. Diane Ellison in her bed. And in the chair beside her, clearly visible, a man Mara had never seen, leaning forward, talking to her mother with the patient deliberateness of someone delivering a message. The audio was inaudible at the table, but the message was not the audio. The message was that Vorn's people had been inside that room last night, within arm's reach of her mother, and had walked out again, and she had not known until this moment. Mara's breath stopped for 1 full second. Her hands were flat on the table, and she could feel her own pulse in her palms. She's fine, Vorn said. For now. That can change in the time it takes to make a phone call. He looked at Mara with the specific coldness of someone who has just played a card he has been holding for days and is watching it land exactly where he calculated it would. Sign the deposition, confirm the statement, walk away from this marriage and from Roman Calder, and your mother stays in that hospital room until she's ready to go home. The room had gone completely silent. The kind of silence that has a specific weight. 22 people understanding simultaneously that the nature of what they were inside had just changed. Mara looked at the phone, at her mother's room, at the man in the chair. Her chest was doing something painful and involuntary, and she was letting it do it because stopping it would require energy she needed for something else. She looked up at Vorn, and then she looked at Roman. He was looking at her, not telling her what to do, not calculating for her, just looking at her with the specific expression of a man who has put everything he has into a plan and is watching the plan meet the thing that plans can't account for, the thing that lives past the logic, past the architecture, past the preparation. She breathed. She picked up the deposition form. She looked at it. Her name, the fabricated statement, the account number that was Vorn's own infrastructure turned against him. She looked at Aldridge, at the consortium chair who was watching her with the attention of a man who understood that what happened in the next 30 seconds would determine more than any document on the table. My mother, she said, her voice steady and clear and absolutely without tremor, is at Desert Springs Medical on the 4th floor cardiac ward. I need someone in this room to call hospital security right now and have them confirm that she is safe and that the individual who entered her room last night has been identified. She looked at Aldridge. Not Roman's people. Consortium security, your people. Independent verification. Right now. Aldridge looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. Vorn said, that's not... It takes 4 minutes, Mara said. If she's safe, 4 minutes changes nothing. If she's not... She looked at Vorn. Then everything in this room becomes evidence in a federal kidnapping case, and you've just threatened a civilian in front of 22 witnesses. The room was airless. Aldridge was on his phone. Vorn's 2 men near the door had gone still, and Holt's people, she could see 2 of them now, repositioned, closer, had gone still in a different way, the stillness of bodies coiled for specific action. Roman was on his feet. Vorn looked at his men, and Mara stood up from her chair and said, to no one specifically, and everyone present, whatever happens in the next 4 minutes, the evidence is already with federal authorities. The financial records, the charter alteration, the fabricated deposition. Silas Vorn has been systematically sabotaging the Calder Group's leadership, using an internal actor, funding the campaign with stolen organizational assets, and has just attempted to use a civilian family member as coercive leverage in a consortium proceeding. She put both hands on the table and looked at the room. That is not a Calder Group problem. That is a crime. and everyone in this room is currently a witness to the coercion attempt. Vorn moved, not toward her, toward the door. Roman moved faster. He crossed the room in 4 strides and put himself between Vorn and the exit with the specific physicality of a man who had spent his adult life in spaces where the difference between controlling a room and losing it came down to whether you moved first. He was 6 feet from Vorn, and he didn't touch him, and he didn't need to, because the 2 men near the door had registered Holt's people repositioning and made the calculation that stopping being useful to Vorn was better than the alternative, and they stepped back. Vorn looked at Roman. For the first time since Mara had entered this room, he looked like a man standing in a situation he had not fully designed. "This isn't over," Vorn said. "It is in this room," Roman said. His voice was very quiet. "Walk out of here, Silas. Walk out before Aldridge gets off that phone, because once he does, the next call he makes is not going to be one you want him to make." Aldridge's voice cut across the room. "Hospital security confirms Diane Ellison is safe. They have detained and are holding an individual who entered her room last evening without proper visitor documentation. They are requesting guidance on involving law enforcement." The room exhaled. Vorn looked at Roman. Then he looked at Mara. The assessment in his eyes had shifted into something she didn't have a name for. Not respect, not defeat, something more specific. The look of someone recalculating from the ground up. He picked up his phone from the table. He straightened his jacket. He walked toward the door, and Holt's people let him pass, because Roman gave a fractional nod that said let him go, and that was the right call. She understood. Vorn walking out was the same as Vorn leaving the field, and a man like that in a corner was. Vorn walked out. The room held its breath for 3 seconds after the door closed behind him, and then it didn't. It broke into the specific controlled chaos of 22 people simultaneously processing a shift in reality and deciding what their role in it was. Voices, chairs moving. Aldridge already on his second call, his voice low and deliberate. The words Federal Liaison and Consortium Security Protocol audible above the general noise. Mara stood at the table with both hands still flat on its surface and let the room move around her. Her legs were steady. Her hands were steady. Everything below the surface of her was not steady at all, but that was below the surface, and the surface was what the room could see, so the surface held. Roman came back from the door. He stopped beside her and looked at her with the particular attention of someone checking a structure for damage after a load-bearing event. "She's safe," he said. Meaning her mother. Meaning the call Aldridge had made. "I heard him." She looked at Roman. "The man they detained at the hospital. Holt needs to get there before the police process him out. He's connected to Vorn's operation, and he'll disappear the moment he's released if we don't." "Already handled." Roman's hand came up and rested, briefly, on her shoulder. Not a grip, just a point of contact. Then it dropped. "Garvey's coordinating with the federal contact. The man at the hospital is a thread. We'll pull it." She nodded. She straightened up and pulled her hands off the table and looked at the room, at the consortium members who were watching her with the specific quality of attention that people give to someone they have just recategorized. And she understood that something had shifted in here that was not going to shift back. She had stood in this room and dismantled a case that had been built over 8 months, and she had done it with documents and logic and the specific fury of someone who had been underestimated past the point of tolerance, and the room had watched. Aldridge caught her eye from across the table. He was off his phone. He was looking at her the way people look at things that surprise them. Not suspiciously, not warmly, but with the recalibrating attention of honest reassessment. He gave her a nod. Small, formal. The nod of a man who operates in a world where that particular gesture carries specific weight. She nodded back. She picked up her documents from the table. She stacked them with the automatic neatness of someone who organized things when their hands needed something to do. Then she walked out. The corridor outside the Monarch room was quiet, carpeted, climate-controlled, the casino's operations humming somewhere below them like a kept promise. Holt was in the corridor, 2 of his people, the low-register coordination of a security operation winding down from high alert to sustained vigilance. She went to the window at the corridor's end and looked out. 14th floor. The strip below, mid-morning, its daylight face stripped of glamour and honest in a way it never was at night. Just a street, just traffic, just people moving through a city that did not particularly care about any of them. She was still standing there when Roman came out. He came to stand beside her, not close, not distant, the same calibrated space they had been navigating for 9 days, that had been shifting incrementally each day in a direction neither of them had named. Garvey says the federal filing is complete, he said. The financial records, the charter alteration, the hospital incident. It's all time-stamped and in the right hands. A pause. Vorn will lawyer up within the hour. It'll be a long process, but the structure of the case is solid. And the charter challenge? Stands. The succession provision is suspended. The board vote can't be triggered. He looked at the window. I have time. Good, she said. They were quiet. Below them, the city continued its indifferent daylit business. Constance, she said. Garvey has a locate on her. She's in Phoenix. She's not going anywhere. She's 63 and she's been maintaining contact with an account we can now access. She didn't disappear well. She disappeared like someone who had never had to do it before. He paused. She'll be part of the federal case. Were you close to her? He was quiet for a moment. She used to bring food to my father's office on Saturdays. He worked Saturdays, always. She'd bring food because he'd forget to eat. Another pause. When he died, she was the first person to call me. Before the attorneys, before the board. She called me and she cried on the phone, and I believed every second of it. Mara looked at him. He was looking at the city. His profile in the morning light was tired and specific and real, in the way that people are real when they've stopped performing for a room. I'm sorry, she said. This time he didn't tell her not to be. He just nodded once, small and private, and they stood at the window in the quiet of a corridor where nothing was required of either of them for the first time in 9 days. They went to the hospital that afternoon. Diane Ellison was sitting up in bed with her arms crossed and an expression that had passed through frightened and landed in the specific territory of a woman who has had sufficient time to convert fear into productive anger. The consortium's security contact had posted 2 people on the floor, a concession to the morning's events that Aldridge had arranged without being asked, which Mara noted and appreciated in the way she was learning to appreciate things that happened without requiring her to fight for them. Roman stayed in the doorway. He had done this the first time too, she remembered, the threshold, the not quite entering. She thought she understood it now. He was giving her the room, giving her her mother without filling the space himself. Diane looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she said, "The man who came last night. He's been detained. He won't come back. He didn't touch me. He sat in that chair and talked to me very calmly for 4 minutes about the weather and about how hospitals were cold places and about how he hoped my recovery was going well." Diane's voice was controlled, and underneath it was something that was not controlled at all, the particular tremor of a woman who had sat with a threat she didn't fully understand and had kept herself composed through it by sheer will. And then he left, and I didn't know until this morning what it was. Mara sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hands. She didn't say anything for a moment. "It's done," she said. "The people responsible. It's being handled. You're safe." "You're sure?" "Yes." Diane looked at her, then passed her at Roman in the doorway. "Come in," she said. "I'm not going to bite you." He came in. He stood at the foot of the bed with his hands at his sides and said, "Mrs. Ellison, I'm sorry. You were put at risk because of my situation. That was not acceptable, and I take responsibility for it." Diane looked at him with her through-things eyes. "Did you intend for any of this to happen?" "No." "Did you try to stop it when you knew?" "Yes." "Did she a nod toward Mara. "Get hurt?" "No." "Did you let her take risks you should have taken yourself?" Roman paused, the honest pause of someone who would not answer a question like that without actually considering it. "There were moments where she moved faster than I could stop her," he said. "I'm not sure I would have stopped her even if I could." Diane looked at him for a long moment. "Sit down," she said. "You look like you haven't sat down in a week." He sat. The 3 of them were in the hospital room for 2 hours. Diane asked questions, not about the organization, not about the events, but about Roman, with the direct, unsentimental curiosity of a woman assessing the man her daughter was standing next to. She asked where he grew up. She asked about his father. She asked what he was going to do with all those casinos. He answered everything without deflecting, which Mara suspected was something Diane was testing for, the deflection test, the see if he performs test. He didn't perform, he just answered. At one point, Diane said, "My daughter wanted to be a choreographer." Roman looked at Mara. "I know. She's good. She was always good. She gave it up because she ran out of money, and she stayed here because she ran out of options." Diane looked at her daughter with a combination of love and a particular maternal bluntness that had always been her mode. "Don't let her give it up again." "Mom, I'm talking to him." Roman held Diane's gaze. "I won't," he said. The word landed with a weight that surprised Mara, the specific gravity of a man who meant something past the surface of what he'd said. The Vaughan case moved through its legal machinery in the weeks that followed with the grinding, non-cinematic pace of institutional process. Federal investigators, documentation, attorneys and counter-attorneys, and the elaborate procedural architecture of a serious criminal case being built from a substantial evidentiary foundation. Garvey managed it on the Calder side with the focused efficiency of someone doing the most important work of his career. Mara met with federal investigators twice, both times without Roman in the room, both times with her own counsel, both times with the complete unmanaged account of everything she had witnessed and assembled. The investigator who took her second statement was a woman named Hatch, 40s, with the quality attention of someone who had heard a lot of accounts and was accustomed to parsing the truth inside them. She asked sharp questions and took precise notes, and at the end of the second session, she looked at Mara and said, "You put this together in 6 days." 7, Mara said. "I had help." "Most people in your position would have taken the money and signed the deposition. Most people in my position didn't have specific reasons not to." Hatch looked at her for a moment. "What were yours?" Mara thought about it, about the car and the exhaustion and the number on the card that she'd signed her life over for. About waking up in a penthouse with a ring she hadn't chosen and a situation she hadn't designed. About the specific fury of being treated as a piece. "I don't like being used," she said, "and I don't like people who use other people." Constance Arden was arrested in Phoenix on a Tuesday, 12 days after the summit. The news reached Mara through Garvey, who called Roman, who told her in the kitchen of the penthouse suite while they were both drinking coffee at 7 in the morning, in the particular comfortable quiet that had accumulated between them over the weeks without either of them formally acknowledging that it had accumulated. Roman took the call, listened, said 3 words, ended it. He put the phone on the counter. "Constance," Mara said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She looked at her coffee. "How do you feel?" He was quiet for a moment. He picked up his own cup. "Like something that was unfinished is now finished." He looked at her. "I thought I'd feel angrier. I mostly just feel tired." "That's not tiredness," she said. "That's the thing under the tiredness finally getting permission to surface." He looked at her. "You've been holding it operational for weeks," she said. "The anger, the grief, whatever it actually is. Because the case needed managing and the organization needed managing and I needed managing. Or you thought I did. I never thought you needed managing. You thought I needed protecting, which is close." He set his cup down. "There's a difference." "There is," she said. "I know there is. I'm just saying, yet you can stop now. For today. The case is moving, the charter is intact, Vaughan is under federal investigation, Constance is arrested. Today, for a few hours, you can just..." She paused, looking for the word, "be a person." He looked at her across the kitchen. Morning light from the east windows was reaching the counter between them, flat and ordinary, the kind of light that belongs to real life rather than high-stakes rooms and summit tables. In it, he looked younger than he did in his controlled public mode. He looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just been told he could set it down for a few hours. "Come somewhere with me," he said. "Where?" "Somewhere that isn't here." They drove out of the city. No Holt, no security detail. Roman had negotiated this with Holt, who had objected strenuously and been overruled. Just a car, a quiet road northwest of Vegas where the landscape opened up into the specific austere beauty of the Mojave, all pale rock and distance and sky that went on past the point where looking at it became uncomfortable. Roman drove and she watched the city fall away behind them, and felt something in her chest loosen that she hadn't been aware was tight. He pulled off on a high overlook where the road curved and the valley spread below them. Las Vegas in the middle distance looking small and dense and improbable. All those lights, all that constructed glamour, sitting in the middle of a desert that had been here long before it and would be here long after. They got out. The air was dry and warm and smelled like dust and sage. She leaned against the car and looked at the city. "I've lived there 4 years," she said. "I've never seen it from out here." "I grew up seeing it from inside," he said. "My father used to drive out here. He never told me why. After he died, I found out he came out here once a month for 20 years. He was looking at the valley. I think it was the only place he let himself be small." She looked at him. "He was a lot like me," Roman said. "Managed everything, controlled everything, never let anyone see the machinery." A pause. "It killed him eventually, not the enemies, the management of it, the weight of always being the version of yourself that the room requires." She was quiet for a moment. The wind was low and steady, moving across the overlook with the indifferent patience of something that had been moving here for a long time. "You don't have to be that version," she said. "I know that now," he said. "I'm still learning how to not be it." She looked at the city, at the improbable, impossible, constructed thing that it was. She had come here at 22 with a dance bag and optimism, and a 5-year plan, and the plan had been wrong about everything except that she had stayed, and the staying had led her through 4 years, and a double shift, and a car, and a document, and a ring, and 9 days that had dismantled everything she thought she understood about what her life was. She thought about what her mother had said. "Don't break his heart if you can help it, and don't let him break yours." "I got a call yesterday," she said, "from a studio space in the Arts District. The leaseholder is ending their tenancy. The space is available." She paused. "It's the right size for a small company. 8 to 10 dancers. Production capacity for mid-sized shows." She felt him go still beside her. "I've been thinking about what a company looks like that isn't attached to anything I don't choose," she continued. "What it looks like to build something from the bottom on my own terms." "How much is the lease?" "That's not what I'm asking you." He turned to look at her. She looked back. "I'm not asking you to fund it," she said. "I'm telling you what I want. Because you asked me weeks ago what my plans were, and I said they were shelved, and that wasn't quite true. They were waiting, and I'm telling you now because—" She stopped and looked at the city, and then back at him. "Because you told me you never let anyone close. And I'm deciding to be close. That's what I'm doing. I'm not asking permission." Roman looked at her for a long moment. The specific looking he did, the full attention, nothing managed, nothing shaped version of it that she had come to understand was reserved for moments that mattered to him. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. They stood at the overlook for a long time. The city sat in its valley, and the sky went on past the point of comfortable looking, and the wind moved across them both with its old, patient indifference. And neither of them said anything, because everything that needed to be said had been said, and the rest of it was just the beginning of something that hadn't been named yet. 3 months later, on a Thursday afternoon, Mara Ellison signed a lease, her name only, her signature on a document she had read fully in natural light, sitting at a table she had chosen with complete understanding of every clause. She used a pen that Claire had given her as a gift. Good pen, weight to it, the kind that made signing feel like a statement rather than a transaction. The studio space was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in the Arts District. Hardwood floors that needed refinishing and windows that faced west and flooded the space with afternoon light. It smelled like old wood and possibility. It was exactly the right size. She stood in the empty space after the property manager left, and she walked the perimeter of it, slowly, in her socks because she'd taken her shoes off at the door out of an instinct she hadn't thought about. She felt the floor under her feet, the particular give of good hardwood, the echo of the empty room around her footsteps. She stopped in the center and stood still and looked up at the ceiling, which was high and crossed with old beamwork that she was already imagining what a lighting rig would look like against. Her phone buzzed. "Roman. How is it?" She looked at the room, at the light coming through the west windows in long, flat bands across the floor. "It's right," she typed back. 3 dots. Then, "I'll be there at 6. She put the phone in her pocket. She stood in the center of the empty room and she breathed, slowly, deliberately, all the way down. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, the breath came back out without carrying anything with it. Not the debt, not the math, not the fear, just breath. In and out, in a room that was hers. The divorce papers arrived on a Friday, 6 weeks after the summit. Garvey delivered them in person. A full packet, clean, every provision fair, her own independent counsel having reviewed and approved every clause. No contested assets, no complications. A straightforward legal dissolution of a marriage that had been constructed without consent by people who were now in federal custody or pending federal custody. She sat with the papers on the table in the sitting room of the penthouse. She had been slowly, over weeks, transitioning her things back to an apartment. A different one, better than the one before, in a building that had actual security and an elevator that worked. And she read through them completely. Every page, every clause. Roman sat across from her and waited. She read to the last page. She looked at the signature line with her name printed beneath it. She put the papers on the table. "I know what you want to do," Roman said. His voice was careful. "Do you?" "I think so." She looked at him. At the man who had sat across from her in a hotel suite 9 weeks ago and said, "We have a deal," with the gravity of someone for whom that phrase had actual weight, who had kept every part of the deal, who had not managed her or protected her or tried to put her back in the version of a box that someone else had designed, who had driven out of the city with her on a Tuesday morning and stood at an overlook and talked about his father and about the weight of always being the room version of yourself. "The first paper I signed," she said, "was signed without my knowledge, without my consent, by someone who assumed I was the kind of person who could be used." She paused. "These papers are different. These papers exist because I have a choice." "Yes," he said. "I want the choice to be mine," she said, "not yours, not Vaughn's, not anyone who looked at me and saw a variable. Mine." "It is yours," he said, "whatever you decide." She looked at him for a long moment, at the tiredness that lived under his composure and was, slowly, over weeks, beginning to recede, at the version of him that existed in rooms with no audience and no performance required, at the man who had told her he never let anyone close and was, with the careful deliberateness of someone learning a new skill at an age when learning new skills costs more, learning to let someone close. She picked up the papers, she folded them neatly, crease on crease, and held them. "I'm not signing these," she said. Something moved through his face. "Not because I feel trapped," she said immediately. "Not because of the succession clause or the charter or anything that came from someone else's design. Because I am choosing, freely, with full information and no debt and no fear and no one's hand on my back." She held his gaze. "That's what I'm doing. I want to be clear about that." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm clear," he said. "Good." He reached across the table and took the folded papers from her hands and set them to the side, and left his hand on the table, open, and she put her hand in it, and neither of them said anything because the moment didn't need language. Outside, Las Vegas was doing what it always did, burning with its lights, running its particular version of time, indifferent to the individual stories playing out inside it. 38 floors up, the city looked like a diagram of itself, all pattern and light. The human chaos of it resolved into geometry by distance. She thought about the woman who had stood on a sidewalk outside a service exit with her shoes in her hand and stared at a number on her phone and made a decision that had detonated her life. About the specific exhaustion that had made the decision possible. About the ways that exhaustion had been the condition someone had calculated on. The broke, tired, alone woman who could be moved. That woman had signed a paper in the back of a car and woken up in a world she hadn't chosen. This woman had read every clause. It was 11 months after the night she had signed the NDA when she stood in the wings of a theater in the Arts District with 12 dancers behind her and the sound of an audience settling into their seats coming through the curtain. Her company, her choreography, her lease, her name on the door, her vision worked out over 8 months in the studio with the west-facing windows and the hardwood floors. Roman was in the 4th row. She knew because she'd put him there, not because he needed to be managed, but because she knew exactly what the sightlines were from every seat in that house. And the 4th row center was where the choreography landed best. He was there with Diane, who was out of the hospital, fully recovered, possessed of approximately the same amount of pointed maternal commentary as always, wearing a dress she'd made herself. Because of course she had. Mara stood in the wings and breathed and felt the stage through the soles of her feet and looked at the curtain. She thought about the night at the Overlook, about what Roman had said about his father, about the only place he let himself be small. She thought about what it cost a person to always be the room version of themselves, about what it cost not to be. She thought about choice, the specific weight of it, the way it was both the hardest and the only thing that actually belonged to you. The house lights dimmed. Her breath came in and came back out clean, and she stepped forward, and she began. On the anniversary of the night she had signed away what she thought was her life, Mara stood on the balcony of an apartment that was hers alone and looked out at the strip and felt the specific quality of a night that knew what it meant. Roman was inside. She could hear him through the open door. On the phone, brief and quiet, the efficient rap of a call being ended rather than managed. Then silence, and then his footsteps, and then he was at the door. "Sorry," he said. "It's fine." He came out to the balcony. He stood beside her and looked at the city, and neither of them said anything for a while. The strip ran its lights below them, pink and gold and white. The magnificent, preposterous, irresistible machinery of a city that had been built on the specific human conviction that transformation was possible if you wanted it badly enough and were willing to pay. She had paid. So had he. "Are you happy?" he said. She considered the question the way she considered everything now, fully, without rushing toward a comfortable answer. She thought about the dance company, 6 months old and solvent, and already fielding inquiries for a second production. She thought about her mother in a good apartment 2 miles from the studio, recovered and already back to sewing, already trying to design the costumes for the second show. She thought about Roman, turning his empire toward daylight piece by piece, converting holdings and exiting arrangements and building, slowly and at significant cost, something that could survive scrutiny. She thought about the ring, which she still wore, which she had chosen to continue wearing, which meant something now that had nothing to do with the night she had woken up with it on her hand. "Yes," she said. It was not a performance of it. It was simply true. He nodded. He looked at the city. He reached over and took her hand without looking at her, the easy gesture of someone for whom the action required no ceremony. She had signed a paper once and thought she was signing away her life. She understood now what she'd actually signed. Not an ending, not a trap. The first line of a story that, for the first time, was entirely hers to write. The lights of Las Vegas burned below them, and the night was warm, and that was enough.